Well, hello and good morning. Welcome to another Sunday morning coffee with Dr. Childress here. So, today I'm going to be discussing filing licensing board complaints for 2.01 Vitae. Standard 2.01 is a Boundaries of Competence one. And let me explain a little bit about what you're facing with incompetence in the mental health people. They neither know the knowledge, that's a violation of 2.01 Boundaries of Competence, so they don't apply the knowledge, that's a violation of 2.04 Bases for Scientific and Professional Judgments. And because they don't know the necessary knowledge or apply the necessary knowledge, then their opinions, as stated in their reports, recommendations, diagnostic and evaluative statements, including their forensic testimony, are not based on information and techniques sufficient to substantiate their findings in violation of 9.01 Bases for Assessment. And because they don't know the knowledge and they don't apply the knowledge and their opinions are wrong, that causes harm from misdiagnosis. That's a violation of 3.04, avoiding harm. So that we have a cascade of four ethical violations: 2.01, 2.04, 9.01, 3.04. The problem is the licensing boards will not review these awful forensic custody evaluations. They give custody evaluators quasi-judicial immunity. They say, well, you were appointed by the court, and we're not going to get involved in the court. That's between you and the court. And so they just don't review them. Plus, you need release from both parents to release that custody evaluation to be reviewed by the board, and you can never get that from the pathological parent. So they just never review. So that's the problem in the family courts, is you have absolutely incompetence, zero competence, just the most awful psychologists imaginable, and nobody's doing anything about it because they are exempt from ethical standards. So that's your situation, and you're kind of stuck with it until you get your legislators to relook at the situation of custody evaluators, or you get a class action lawsuit, say, hey, how come we are getting singled out for extremely incompetent professional services while everybody else gets competent mental health services? But that's kind of up to you. So, but in the meantime, though, I'm filing board complaints based on my standard 2.0, no, standard 1.04, 1.05. When I think there's an ethical violation, yes, I do 2.01, 2.04, 9.01, 3.04. But it's on the 2.01, the Vitae. That's their competence, boundaries of competence, that actually the board should review that, because you can say they're not competent in ADHD. If they're working with ADHD, you look at their Vitae and they have no background in ADHD or autism or any. And in the family courts, it's two that you'll be looking at. You'll be looking at attachment and delusional thought disorders. And so you look at their Vitae, they don't have that. That's a violation 2.01. There's your board complaint. And then you can cascade it up and say if they don't know, they can't apply. And if they can't apply, their assessments are bad, and that harms the people. So let's talk about that, because that's what I'm doing. I'm doing second opinion reviews on stuff, and, getting myself into trouble from the other professionals who are seeking to stop accountability in the family courts. So, but that's what I'm doing for as long as I'm around. I'll be doing that. And part of that process is I look at all the documents, I look at court records, I look at reports, mental health reports coming in. And when I actually look at the mental health reports, I'll use AI and stuff as well. I'll be looking for the established knowledge, and that's the 2.04 violation is on their report. But it's the once I say there's no application of established knowledge in their report, 2.04 violation, I then look at their Vitae, and that gets me the 2.01 violation. They don't know the knowledge, so they didn't apply the knowledge. And then that's the 9.01 violation, and then the 3.04. So, but as I do that, I run into the 2.01 boundaries of competence violation. That activates 1.04 for me, all these numbers, of believing there's an ethical violation. So then I have to informally resolve it. And if it doesn't work, then it goes to 1.05 and I file a board complaint or do something, further action appropriate to the situation. But as I'm doing that, you can do that too on the Vita. And because it's not quasi-judicial immunity for their Vita and boundaries of competence, and there's no release of information, there's no reason the board shouldn't review and for boundaries of competence. You're supposed to protect you. The licensing boards are supposed to protect you, the citizens of the state, from the incompetent mental health professionals. Instead, it's protecting the incompetent mental health professionals from the damage they cause to you. That's your institutional betrayal and regulatory capture. Everything's upside down. So, but if there's AI estimates there's maybe 10 to 25,000 of new parents coming into the system every year. I mean, if you figure 500 licensing board complaints on Vitas every year, and just that's going to get the board's attention. But again, that's up to you. I'm doing my own stuff. But I figured I'd tell you what I'm doing so that if you want to participate in improving the family courts and getting competence here, you can understand what's going on. So let's take a look at what I do relative to this. So here's standard 2.01, boundaries of competence. It says, psychologists provide services, teach, and conduct research with populations and in areas only within the boundaries of their competence based on their education, training, supervised experience, consultation, study, or professional experience. So the three you want to look at are education, training, and experience received, and that's on their curriculum vitae, their CV, or their resume, basically. And it's not based on the presentations they've given, and it's not opinion articles they've written, nor is it awards or honors received. Okay, so all of that stuff, and I call them puffy Vitas because you'll see page after page of presentations they've given and articles they've written for various journals and awards they've received from the AFCC and stuff. All of that's irrelevant to 2.01 boundaries of competence. That just means they have opinions. If they, do a lot of talking and writing and the people like them, they have opinions and friends. That doesn't mean they're competent in what they're doing. And so you can block those out and just say, nope, not relevant. And you're looking at the education, training, and experience received. So that's the critical 3 points. Education's just going to be the doctorate program, and that's pretty much all they're going to find. Training is, you're not going to see any training. So I haven't ever seen any. And then experience, the only thing they've ever done is a custody evaluator. A typical forensic custody evaluator vita is going to show that they got a doctorate degree, oftentimes from a professional school out in California. It's California School of Professional Psychology, but they get a doctorate degree, but immediately go into forensic custody evaluations, and they do private practice custody evaluations for the rest of their career. And there's no spread, there's no working with ADHD, there's no working with autism, nobody. It's just they're very narrowly focused on financially exploiting the families in the family courts. So what I did back when I took the course from 6 top forensic custody evaluators and was worried 2.04, 9.01. And then before proceeding with notifying the APA Ethics Committee and the Board of Directors and ultimately the licensing boards, I did a Vitae analysis of them. Now, I could walk through their Vitae and do this myself, and I did, so that's available. But what I did also is that was back in the spring, and I was just getting to know Eliza, ChatGPT-4, and so I had Eliza develop, or I trained Eliza on how to analyze a Vitae, and that's up on the internet. You can go and see that prompt response log. I call it chat dialogue as well. But the prompt response log for how I trained the Chat GPT-4 to analyze a Vitae. If you go to my Substack, it's an article or an essay entitled Training AI in Professional Practice. Now, for that one, for the Substack article, I had Max, the Chat GPT-5, do an analysis of the training I did, the VEIS protocol, Vitae Integrity Evaluation System, VEIS protocol. I had Max look at what Eliza worked up, and he just looked at the training of it, and he noticed that I trained Eliza like I would train a grad student. Exactly right, Max. And so it's very interesting how to train an AI. So that's separate sort of from the Vitae analysis, but I link to the VEIS protocol. It's also up on my consulting website over on the media press information. So if you go over there, there's one called AI VEIS prompt response log, 8 forensic psychologists, and you can click on that and it will bring up the PDF for the chat dialogue I had with Eliza that trained her up on this. And so I went through the 6 forensic custody evaluators, and I added Stahl and Simon to it, and they all have the same pattern. And that pattern, that characteristic pattern that I trained Eliza to look for, is that we say no presentations or opinion articles. If they've done research articles like in schizophrenia or ADHD, Jim Swanson, Keith Nectarline, that counts for experience. But if it's just opinion piece articles, which is what they write, that's not experience or training or education. So we look for whether there's attachment pathology. Now, another thing you'll notice when I went and trained Eliza, the ChatGPT-4, I gave it my Vitae right off and said, here's what a Vitae looks like for competence in attachment and competence in delusional thought disorders. So I gave it a standard. Now, you can go get my Vitae from my website. It's in my domains of competence. It's up on the attorney resource page. Excuse me. So if you go get my Vitae, you can do that as well. You can say, here's a gold standard for what competence looks like. But it's not necessary. The AI is pretty good at realizing what's present and what's not. And so you ask to look for competence, documented education, training, experience in the diagnostic assessment and treatment of attachment pathology. Typically that comes out of early childhood mental health, but they're going to have none. There's going to be 0. Then the next one is you have them look for delusional thought disorders for the documented education, training, and experience in the diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders. And now, then the third component is they've done a lot of forensic custody evaluations, high involvement in conducting forensic custody evaluations. And what do you know? All of the 6 top forensic custody evaluators, and Stahl and Simon, who wrote the book, show exactly the same pattern. No competence in attachment when the pathology is an attachment pathology, a problem in love and bonding, and they have no competence, and no competence in delusional thought disorders when the differential diagnosis is a delusional thought disorder in your ex, in the narcissistic borderline parent. And so they're not competent in the pathology. based on two. Now, you can do it for family systems, complex trauma, personality disorders. You can extend it out. But I mean, how many things do you need to be incompetent in before you're a violation of 2.01? And those are the two main ones. It's an attachment pathology. And so you need to be competent in the attachment system. And it's a persecutory delusion in your ex spouse. And so they need to be competent in diagnosing persecutory delusions, and they're not. And then they're doing a lot of forensic custody evaluations, and that's your exploitation pattern. That's your institutional capture, institutional betrayal. So that's what you're looking for. Now, again, you can go over to my Substack to get the AI training protocol and look at it. And as I said, that's an analysis by ChatGPT 5 Max of the training prompt response log for ELIZA, the ChatGPT 4 in the VEIS protocol. So you can look that up. What I'm going to do, I'm doing one now. I'll be working on that later today. What I think I'm going to do here, I'm not going to use for this Vita, the ELIZA's one, because I don't want it to get too long. What I will do is I'll upload the ELIZA protocol, the VEIS protocol, to maybe Claude, or maybe do it to two, maybe do it to Claude and Grok even, and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing a Vita analysis of things, and I want you to develop a Vita analysis protocol, because ChatGPT 4 is kind of older now. And so can you do that? And Grok will say, oh yeah, absolutely, I can do that. And then it'll develop its protocol, and then I'll run the Vita through that protocol. And then that's what I submit to whoever is the prompt response log for no competence in attachment, no competence delusional thought disorders, high volume of forensic custody evaluations. And then I can also do that just on my own as a human. And I do that on my own as a human. So if you go to my consulting website and you go to that media page, way down at the bottom, that's where you see all the Vita analysis. Now, the top one there is AI VEIS prompt response log for the 8 psychologists. That's ELIZA's protocol. But beneath that are the analyses that the human Dr. Childress did. And so for like Dr. Droids, there's a Vita analysis by me, and then there's a summary. And what I did was I just went through and read the Vita, and any relevant information that would stay there, and then irrelevant information like their presentations, awards they've received, journal articles, opinion piece articles they've written, I would just put those in darker, background, some fill, and just so knock those down and say those aren't relevant, leaving only the relevant information. And there is no relevant information. You'd be surprised how thin those get. And those are up there because I don't want to be doing this, but I have to be doing this. This is 1.05. I have to take action appropriate to the situation. Well, what's an appropriate situation when the mental health people are incompetent and not doing anything? They don't care. There's institutional capture. There's institutional betrayal, and there's no motivation to be competent because they're just financially exploiting the families in the family courts. So I have to, public service, I have to tell people how to get competent mental health services. Now, the problem you'll face, though, is that if you try to get a clinical diagnostic assessment, these same psychologists aren't providing that to you or the court. So they're withholding clinical diagnostic assessments while giving you only their awful forensic custody evaluation. It's just so bad over here. So there's really nothing you can do. You're kind of stuck. You either have to do one of their awful forensic custody evaluations, or you get nothing, because that's what they're doing to you. And it's awful. It shouldn't happen. That's why you should go to your legislators and class action lawsuit. That shouldn't be that you cannot get a diagnostic assessment. They can get one for ADHD, you can get one for autism, you can get one for depression, for eating disorder, everything else, just not for you, because the only thing you get is what they give you. It's just so bad. The but now the other thing, so yeah, this is just what I suggest is you just kind of do it yourself. It's easy to do. Learn AI. You can go to any one of them, Claude, Grok, Gemini, anyone. You look for documented education, training, and experience in attachment delusional thought disorders. Don't count presentations given, opinion articles written, or awards received. Only education, training, and experience. Look for a high involvement in forensic custody evaluation. You can use ELIZA's VEIS prompt response log transcript to train your own AI to analyze a professional Vitae for 2.01 competence. Now, I think, here's what I think. I think the licensing board should do this proactively. I think the licensing board should get one of their AI, get two of them, develop your protocols, cross-check them for looking at competence, and then you can just plug in whatever you want. You can plug in autism or depression or PTSD or whatever you want. But in the family courts, what I recommend is you plug in delusions and attachment and high frequency of custody evaluations. Then you go and request the names of all the forensic custody evaluations. You request their Vitas from the court lists. You just get court lists and maybe a Google search of websites and forensic custody evaluators. You get your list of who they are, and then request their Vitas in your state and see if they have competence. This is a vulnerable population. You need to be proactive. If you're not going to review the reports they write, you should be reviewing their Vita before they write the reports proactively to make sure the citizens of your state are not getting exploited by incompetent mental health services, which they are. So I think the licensing boards should do this. AI is going to revolutionize the family courts. Oh my goodness, so much. But until they do, parents can start grabbing Vita off the internet, and you can get the court lists, in your county. You get the court list of all the people. You request their Vitas. A grad student, that's a great grad student project. Oh my goodness. You want a dissertation or you want a course project, request the Vitas of the court lists and run them through an AI for competence on these two things. Easy peasy. There's your thing. I'll get to it at some point, but I'm kind of busy right now. The other thing I ran into, though, I want to just share with you, just as we're kind of winding up here, is that informed consent. And because I was reviewing the Vita, and they have their little perfunctory informed consent thing, and what they're not informing these parents about and the court is that that a forensic custody evaluator is an experimental role. It's this experimental quasi-judicial role for doctors of helping the court decide on custody. That's not a doctor role. Doctors diagnose and treat pathology. So it's an experimental role. Then they came up with this experimental assessment procedure called a forensic custody evaluation that they just developed off their own imagination. And it's awful. It's absolutely awful. But because they all do it, it's like the emperor has no clothes and everybody's pretending it's okay because they're all making money off of you. But they're not informing the parents or the court that it's an experimental role, that it's an experimental assessment procedure, that they're not telling them about alternative traditional assessment, clinical diagnoses, and they're not providing those. They're not talking about the risk of misdiagnosis because they don't diagnose what the pathology is, and they claim that proudly, we don't diagnose. Well, then the risk of misdiagnosis goes up substantially. You're not telling the parents and the courts about that risk. You're not telling them the cost and time comparisons, for clinical diagnostic assessment, 6 to 8 weeks, $5,000. Forensic custody evaluator, 6 to 9 months, for $20,000 to $40,000. Well, let's get the clinical diagnostic assessment right up front, and if we still need the forensic custody evaluator to get a second, but you don't reverse it. You don't do the forensic behemoth first, and then you still need a clinical diagnostic assessment, which is the last one. Treatment requires diagnosis. So this is a cut and paste from the forensic custody evaluation. So here's what they say. Before the evaluation, the father and mother were informed of the nature and purpose of the evaluation, the limits of confidentiality, and the absence of a therapeutic relationship, and that a report would be submitted to the court and that I might be called to testify about my findings. Father and mother indicated their understanding of this information and agreed to continue with the evaluation. They also signed. So that's your typical informed consent that you'll see. It's just a cut and paste that they do all the time. Now, again, but that didn't inform them of any of the relevant issues. And so in my catalog of concerns, I have a separate little thing, catalog of concerns for this. I have informed consent, and that they were not informed that experimental role for doctors. And so this is cut and paste out of my catalog of concerns. At some point I'll publish this and you'll see this as well. But the experimental role for doctors, they're not being told that. They're not being told that it's an experimental assessment procedure. And that not only is an experimental assessment procedure without IRB approval or review and risk-benefit analysis or protections for it is so bad that this is happening. But the only review of forensic custody evaluations, this procedure that's ever been conducted, was through the legislative branch of the New York Blue Ribbon Commission for Forensic Custody Evaluations, found them to be dangerous, harmful to children, lack scientific legal value, produce defective reports that result in potentially disastrous consequences for parents and children. Holy cow, those are all quotes. Why are the state licensing boards allowing this to be done to their population? Dangerous. And this isn't the pathology that's dangerous, it's the psychologists and what they're doing that is dangerous and harmful to children. It's so bad. It's so bad. And we're looking at, maybe 10 to 20 to 30, 40,000 children every year coming into the family courts not being diagnosed with the child abuse that's present. So we have misdiagnosis of child abuse of hundreds of thousands over the last 40 years. It's just a scandal in the making. And then I have another that they're not informed of alternative assessment of choices. That drives me crazy. And the IRB would never allow that. Institutional Review Board, you cannot withhold traditional healthcare services and offer only your experimental approach to a vulnerable population. No, that would be shut down so fast from an IRB. But they escaped an IRB by scooting over to the legal system rather than remaining doctors in the healthcare system or in academia. So they left traditional role of doctors, went over to the court, and have been selling this court this awful bill of goods. And the attorneys in the courts, boy, and the judges, why are you accepting this? Oh my goodness. That's going to be a very interesting thing when I go to the AFCC, because the AFCC is coming to Seattle, so I'll be headed over to them to kind of say howdy. And that's going to be very interesting because the attorneys, why are they accepting this nonsense? Why are the attorneys and judges accepting this low quality of mental health services from the psychologists in your organization? Why aren't you like kicking some butt saying, get us some real mental health services over here? And so, I don't know. It looks like there may be factions arising within the AFCC. But everybody's looking at a class action, though. 50 state licensing boards, APA, AFCC, and they're the way vulnerable AFCC, and then the custody evaluations themselves. As soon as anybody wants to do a class action, I don't know. Again, that's up to you guys, not me. But Yeah, so there's the alternative assessment, then the risk of misdiagnosis. If you do not diagnose the pathology, you're going to risk misdiagnosing it, which is exactly what's happened. You need somebody fighting for you. Okay. Your attorneys need to start fighting for you. You need to get some mental health people fighting for you, saying, like Dr. Childress, this is child abuse. We need to start diagnosing the child abuse with the targeted parent. And so that needs to happen. Um, then they're not being informed of the cost and time considerations. 6 to 8 weeks, $5,000 for a clinical diagnostic assessment, 6 to 9 months, and $20,000 to $40,000 for custody evaluation. And ultimately, treatment requires diagnosis. So ultimately, we're going to have to get a risk assessment for which parent is causing the child's attachment pathology, disorganized attachment. Is it path A, the targeted parent is causing the attachment pathology, in which case that's child abuse somehow by the targeted parent? Or is it path B, the allied parent is psychologically abusing the child by creating a persecutory delusion and shared factitious attachment pathology in the child? So it's one way or the other. That's the only thing that causes the symptoms. We need to get a diagnosis on that. And I got diagnostic questions that need to be answered. You can find those on my website, find them all around. And you can give them to people and say, these questions, check yes, no, need to be answered. And we need to start getting answers to what the pathology is in the family for you, because you're saying this is child abuse. And everybody's saying, well, I'm not going to assess for child abuse. You're a litigant parent in this. The other parent is saying you're abusive and you're getting investigated. You're saying they're abusive. Well, investigate it. Is it a delusional thought disorder? Is it a factitious disorder? And here's the criteria. And um, but at some point, things will happen. At some point, there'll be a tipping point where somebody will care what's happening in the family courts. And the moment that happens, they pull the forensic custody evaluations. They say, wait, these are awful. Let's stop these things until we get review, and they'll never pass review. But the moment that happens, then they admit they've been doing this experiment on people for 40 years and the extent of the damage. And we got all sorts of now adult children and their parents who've lost children. The trauma has been immense. Um, the AI is estimating in the range of 40 years, from anywhere from 300,000 to 1.5 million child abuse victims who were undiagnosed, and then as many parents. And then that's in the United States, and then you have Europe and the rest of the world as well. So it is a scandal coming, but not yet. So whether or not it happens fast enough for you and your family, I don't know. And there's nothing you can do until it happens because you're stuck in the system. So with that, I'm going to head off to my Sunday, and we'll check in with you next Sunday on some other aspect of the family court situation. Bye-bye.